Hello and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today we're diving into a moment in history when mockery in the skies would slowly turn into fear and laughter would give way to silence. What you're about to hear is not just a story of aircraft and pilots, but of how a single machine changed the balance of air warfare forever. April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Ralph Hermanson's smirk as he watched the ungainly silhouette struggling upward toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, only 26 years old, studied the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts fighting for altitude. Below them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R, 2,800 double Wasp engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these bloated American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for such massive bodies, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What Hermanson didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of ridicule into instruments of terror, their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded into those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakely, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. A former Eagle Squadron veteran who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, he understood what his men did not yet know. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turning performance, Republic Aviation had created something unprecedented, a high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power, and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky, that morning were men who would become legends, future aces whose names would one day strike fear into Luftwaffe hearts. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting continuously since 1939, veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This story is about how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged into overwhelming superiority, and how German pilots' laughter turned to terror when they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a panic in June 1940. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Cartelli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Forces. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Cartelli designed instead was a monster that redefined what was possible. "It will be a dinosaur," he admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941 shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably ask the same question. This thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger, driven by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where the air was far too thin for conventional superchargers to work effectively. Major Huber Hub Zorn, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground looped on landing, torque rolled on takeoff, and dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, and couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Prauler, commanding officer of Jageschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics seem to support German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, watching from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested that the Americans might want to reconsider their choice of aircraft. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters, something German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed astonishing punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a mission on May 4th with 21 cannon holes and more than 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable liquid cooling systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter instantly. More importantly, when P-47s did manage to bring their guns onto a target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergent zone of destruction unlike anything German pilots had ever experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber guns of early war fighters or cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could sustain continuous fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The event that began changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over La Haye, France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the war. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from 2/GG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving out of the sun with an overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers and took catastrophic damage in the opening seconds of combat. 20mm cannon shells tore across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, the engine cowling was ripped open, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried to bail out, only to discover the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about how much damage a fighter could endure. With no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, an engine barely functioning and shaking violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson somehow leveled the aircraft and pointed it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling wreckage. Then it became worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from 2/JG-26, spotted the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this pilot, though several names have been proposed based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 20mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. The German repositioned and fired again, now using only his machine guns. When that ammunition was spent, he pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, and finally to something approaching awe. The German pilot moved back into position and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still it flew. He pulled alongside one last time, shook his head in amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 reached Manston, its engine failing as it rolled down the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. Control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, had been shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's Thunderbolt sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving reports from 2/JG-26, initially refused to believe them. No aircraft, they insisted, could absorb that level of punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighters could deliver and survived. By July 1943, American pilots were beginning to understand how to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Huber Hub Zemke, commander of the 56 Fighter Group, had uncovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't try to climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, once seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach over 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. That speed could be converted into altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, refined what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots jokingly called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional turning dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe aircraft appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting nearly impossible for the defending Germans. At the bottom of those dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as flying into a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern did not simply fall, they disintegrated. The true revelation of American firepower came during the dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg on August 17, 1943, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted up to that point. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitation, its restricted range even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when employed correctly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17 bombers with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. These twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Bf-110s who survived, later recounted during a POW interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage. The tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt 110s and 109s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At the convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything entering that zone faced 100 projectiles per second, each traveling at about 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial power. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon supplies, typically only 120 to 200 rounds for a 20 millimeters weapon, American pilots could maintain continuous fire for over 30 seconds. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and ball ammunition in carefully designed patterns meant both to tear aircraft apart and to ignite fuel and structural components. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying truth about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German aircraft relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers saw their performance degrade sharply above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A 6 sluggish and unresponsive in thin air. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was now gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on its formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to becoming an ace, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with an elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Open fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shock waves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived more than 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, could not survive against the Thunderbolts, What chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass in the windscreen, and armor deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with massive paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, their broad cords biting into the air like enormous oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had struggled to climb at a weak 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Nordjägerschwader 11, a veteran with more than 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thunderous roar created by blade tips approaching supersonic speed could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported they could identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending their range to more than 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when heavily loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms almost immediately after dropping their tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to halt the American daylight campaign. But this meant flying directly through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on fear for the massive American fighters. Major Gunther Rall, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, most of them on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944 that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun." Someone laughed and said, "Here come the flying pigs." Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death. Escort missions revealed another Thunderbolt advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that burned fuel rapidly, the big American radial engines could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while still maintaining enough fuel for combat and the return trip. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived in the spring of 1944 to take over long-range escort duties, P-47 units increasingly shifted toward ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved just as devastating against ground targets. Standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could obliterate soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst placed around 160 half-inch projectiles into an area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to that of early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each one equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Linde, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them J-bows, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. More than 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an almost impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters that attempted to reach the landing zones were annihilated. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader 21, one of only 3 German pilots who managed to reach the beaches that day, later reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them. You couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armor vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move almost exclusively at night, severely limiting its ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, and developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made it nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak gun struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating out of New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's characteristics were perfectly matched to the vast distances and brutal conditions of the Pacific War. Its range, durability, and firepower made it ideal for long missions over ocean and jungle alike. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically adapted to this environment. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against a force of 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in a single mission, an achievement that earned him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, who were accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were completely unprepared for the P-47's combination of overwhelming firepower and extraordinary toughness. The famous Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered Thunderbolts over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with only a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. The P-47N, developed specifically for operations in Pacific, featured greatly increased fuel capacity, with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending its range to nearly 2,350 miles. This variant would go on to escort B-29 superfortresses all the way to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range strategic weapon. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolution came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its top speed of over 540 miles per hour, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven aircraft. Yet Thunderbolt pilots discovered that jets were vulnerable in two critical situations: during takeoff and landing, when their acceleration was slow and predictable, and in high-speed dives from altitude, where the P-47 could briefly match their speed. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down a Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to close on the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer opened fire at 400 yards. His combat report was blunt and devastating. The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of .50 caliber guns proved more effective than we had anticipated against jet aircraft. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were being deployed specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to nearly 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach about 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jets under certain conditions. Major George Boswick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, equipped with P-47MS, shot down two Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical assessment emphasized firepower rather than speed. "The jets are faster," he said, "but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial power came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to cripple Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, flown by their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 Airfield near Metz, home of the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning wreckage and sneered, "What do you think of that?" Major George Boring's reply became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stand for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk vanished. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40S filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots during Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These were losses Germany could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft across all attacked airfields, all of which were replaced within a week. The numbers alone told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, Built from empty farmland in 1942, with producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded even peacetime standards. Ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, and with hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily, consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several massive ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring flawless feeding through the synchronized gun systems. The fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned about 100 gallons of fuel per hour in normal flight, and up to 300 gallons per hour in combat, when water injection was engaged. The 9th Air Force alone was consuming more than 25 million gallons of aviation fuel every month by late 1944. All of it had to be shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of the same American system of mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots a year from advanced training programs, more than Germany had trained during the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including at least 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were going into battle with less than 100 total flight hours by the end of the war. The difference showed immediately in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe already trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and combat tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft and understood their enemy's strengths and weaknesses. They knew their own machines intimately, having studied detailed technical manuals that German pilots never received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, embodied this training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from real combat. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberleutnant Joseph Prowler, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials trying to boost collapsing morale. His statement was judged too demoralizing to publish. It revealed how completely German attitudes had changed. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it is gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage, and courage without resources is only delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We are not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it is overwhelming material superiority. They did not defeat us with better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most remaining aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. But even when aircraft and fuel were available, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Any attack meant confronting P-47 formations that dominated every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brechner, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above for Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was being hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. In my parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staffel. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress that appeared whenever Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions involving P-47s. The distinctive thunder approaching Thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops, who knew survival meant finding cover immediately. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied comprehension. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft were destroyed in aerial combat. 3,315 more were destroyed on the ground. 86,000 railway cars were destroyed. 9,000 locomotives were destroyed. 6,000 armored fighting vehicles were destroyed. 68,000 trucks were destroyed. 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles were destroyed. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in aerial combat. 150 aircraft were destroyed on the ground. 1,500 vehicles were destroyed. 150 locomotives were destroyed. Countless barges, ships, and installations were eliminated. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6 to 1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against the Western Allies. Many of them fell to the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training that Germany could never replace. By the end of the war, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had more than 200. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were questioned by German intelligence. Records recovered in 1945 revealed German assessments of Allied aircraft. The file on the P-47, updated continuously throughout the war, showed a complete reversal of German opinion. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter. Inferior to German types in all performance parameters except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Assessment, minimal threat. December 1943. Exceptional high-altitude performance. Extreme structural strength. Firepower increasingly problematic. Pilots showing improved tactics. Assessment, significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber. Superior to all German types above 20,000 feet. Firepower devastating against all target types. Structural strength makes shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment, critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment, unsurvivable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former enemies met in peace. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His reply, recorded on video, captured the full transformation in thinking. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. We said, the Americans do not understand air combat. They have built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who did not understand. The Americans did not try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the aircraft that could absorb punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. And they were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed as if it were falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable. The visibility was excellent. The controls were precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what impressed me most was realizing that America built more than 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a war across 2 oceans. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That is when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 did not just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47's design embodied American industrial philosophy perfectly, brute force engineering backed by limitless resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 G-forces. The control cables were doubled throughout, with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, were fed by electric boost motors to prevent jamming during violent maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. Convergence could be adjusted from 150 to 400 yards, allowing pilots to tailor their fire to their preferred engagement distance. Even after the war, some German veterans insisted that the P-47 won through quantity rather than quality, that German fighters were technically superior but simply overwhelmed by numbers. Combat records told a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, P-47s consistently prevailed. The heavy machine gun armament, dismissed early on as inferior to cannon, proved more effective in real combat. Analysis of gun camera footage explained why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aim and were carried in limited quantities, usually only 120 to 200 rounds. The P-47's weapons created a dense probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst placed at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, more than enough to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. American .50 caliber armor-piercing, incendiary rounds used delayed-action fuses that allowed penetration before detonation. The incendiary compound burned at nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum structure. German 20mm shells, while heavier, often exploded on surface impact, producing spectacular flashes, but sometimes only superficial damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of nearly 10,000 pounds exceeded the loaded weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its weapons delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry, and yet it was built by the thousands, flown by young men barely out of high school, and maintained under combat conditions by mechanics who had learned their trade in weeks. The transformation of German opinion from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In that time, The flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft the Luftwaffe had ever faced. Veterans who had confronted Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without hesitation spoke of the P-47 in hushed tones decades after the war. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Its placard lists specifications and battle honors, but the real story is told by a small display case beside it. Inside are spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Below that display is a quote from an unnamed German pilot, taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They only had to point those guns at you, and you ceased to exist." The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of ridicule and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead. German pilots had laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.